right, everyone, we are back. I hope you've all had a refreshing break, and we are now starting our afternoon portion of this EBSI Demo Day. So for those of us who are joining us just now, thanks for joining. I will now introduce the third portion of our day, which is focused on the future. But first, a reminder of the guidelines, the ground rules to make this meeting go well. So we do have two main channels that we use. We're obviously using WebEx. You have access to the chat. You can use it for general questions throughout, as well as technical support. But we will be using Slido for audience interactions with our speakers. I also have some general rules to pass on regarding the use of the WebEx chat. So please be kind, be courteous. We welcome discussion, but treat each other with respect. We will not tolerate any kind of hate speech or bullying. Please also make sure not to reveal personal information about yourself or about others that would lead to doxing. Do not self-promote, do not spam in the chat, and try to stay on topic because we have a lot to discuss. Finally, if you run into any kind of technical support, just make sure to chat with our technical support account. They are named technical support. You can send them a private message via WebEx, and then we will try to resolve the problem for you. So, with that said, let's have a look at our agenda for this last portion of the day. It's been a long one, but we have a few more exciting things for you in store. We spent a lot of time looking at the state of play today for EBSI, but also for the general verifiable credentials landscape at large. But now we need to look ahead. And we first will start with a panel discussion on the future of the digital credentials landscape, digital trust, and we'll introduce this in a bit more detail afterwards. And then we will conclude our day with a question that a lot of you have been asking in the chat on how you can get involved in EBSI. And finally, we will close our day with some concluding remarks. We are running a little bit behind schedule, approximately 15 minutes, but I think we might catch up on that towards the end portion of our day. So thank you for sitting tight with us and staying with us throughout this exciting and long day of demos. And now, I will introduce our panel discussion. The topic is a vision of a decentralized future and the role of the public sector within that. I will be the moderator. For those of you who haven't been with us since the start, I'm Maxine Lem. I am a project manager at the European Commission's DG Digit, and among other things, I also manage teams that work on EBSI. Our panelists today, I will take a minute to introduce them. Could you all turn on your cameras so that we see you, and then we will make the slides disappear. But for now, we'll keep this slide here. So I will introduce you all, and I will ask you to say a couple of words about who you are. There's some information on the slide, and to keep it short, and also to give us a little sentence on your impressions from the demos that you all attended this afternoon. So I will start with Andrea SERVIDA. Andrea is head of unit in DG Connect in knowledge management and innovative system. Andrea, could you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you very much, Maxine. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm Andrea SERVIDA. I have a past life in the area of identity management, and I've been behind the development of the others regulation, the implementation of the other regulation. At this moment in time, I'm responsible of the knowledge management and innovative system unit in DG Connect, trying to push the digital transformation within the DG and across the Commission.
Thank you, Koen. And how did you feel about the demos that you saw? A quick thought.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you, Maxine. I really very much liked the demos, I must say, because it showed the diversity of views in the learning field. And we had micro-credentials as the last demo. I think very interesting because it's up and reskilling. Also for the transcripts and also the qualification passport for refugees. I think it's a very interesting example of how blockchain is being used.
And Koen, you work at DG Emploi, so you're a colleague of mine. Welcome. I will now introduce Sebastiano TOFFALETTI, Secretary General of the European Digital SME Alliance. Sebastiano, are you with us? Could you turn on your camera so we see you?
Hello, Maxine. I hope everyone can see and hear me.
Yeah,
all right. Great. Well, nice to be with you. As introduced, I'm Sebastiano TOFFALETTI. I'm here for the European Digital SME Alliance, an organization that represents around 45,000 SMEs in the digital sector across the EU. We are very excited about technology. Many SMEs nowadays are looking at blockchain as a great potential technology, and EBSI is certainly something very promising for us. The demos that I've seen are very good in my opinion, especially in demonstrating the potential that is there for an infrastructure like this. And I think about especially it could be used for compliance with legislation, especially by SMEs. So cutting a lot of red tape for SMEs will be very important. If we can use the potential of blockchain for that, for the businesses to talk to the administrations, to demonstrate, their compliance, this would be great.
Thanks so much, Sebastiano, and we'll go into that. Marc Taverner, you're here. You're the executive director of INATBA, a trade association representing the blockchain industry. Marc, if you could say a couple of words and show yourself.
Thank you, Maxine. Hopefully I'm showing myself appropriately, adhering to the rules. It's a pleasure to be with you. So as you said, INATBA is a trade association that represents approximately 170 companies innovating in the space of blockchain, proudly headquartered in Brussels, working with a large number of European players, many of whom have been innovating in and around EBSI for quite some time. And from some of the demos that I saw, you have to excuse me, I didn't manage to see all of them because I'm talking at another event here in Blockchain Island at the moment. What really struck me was the ability to solve not just problems around efficiencies and improving speed of data flow, but some real world problems that we're facing at the moment to do with migration of individuals, some of the challenges that individuals in Europe face, moving from one country to another for whatever reason. And I think anything that supports those enhancements of Europe's citizens to enjoy their freedom, enjoy their privacy, gain access to service, and have the choice to work where they want to work, to move to where they want to move to, and to be able to prove who they are without needing to go through encumbered processes that might create privacy risks for them or even security risks for them. They all get my vote, absolutely. So I've been enamored by some of the demos that I've managed to see. And again, thank you for having us here.
Thanks so much, Marc. And obviously, Marc and Sebastiano, we are well known to the EBSI project. We have collaborated. And last but not least, we have Katrien VANELVEN. Katrien, you are a policy advisor at the International Office of the University of KU Leuven in Belgium. But also, you have been a part of Europa. You're part of Europa. So could you say a little bit more about yourself and then also a little bit more about Europa?
Of course, thank you. Yes, since spring 2018, I've been contributing to the establishment of Europa, now an alliance of 11 European universities collaborating in education, research, innovation, service to society. And in Europa's One Euro project, at the moment, I'm leading the work package, the European University Ecosystem, where we try to create a sustainable ecosystem in which an alliance such as Europa can thrive, and in which students and staff members can move seamlessly, virtually and physically, and for education and research. And one of those framework conditions that we need to create is having the supporting technology and infrastructure. Technology and infrastructure to support blended and virtual education, to support smooth administrative processes, and to support access for students and staff members to all services within Europa. And so this is why within the Alliance we are joining forces to further elaborate and test blockchain technology to register and exchange credits obtained by students during an exchange period at a partner university, as well as for the authentication of digital decrees.
Katrien, we lost your sound. You've been muted.
Oh, sorry.
Perfect.
Back now, yes. So to register and exchange credits, as you've seen in demo 1, I hope you found it as inspiring as I found the other demos as well. I've learned so much, and I'd like to echo what my colleagues have said previously.
Thanks so much, everybody, and thanks for making the time today. This is no accident that I had you introduce yourself last, because it allows me to dive into the first topic of our panel, which is to kind of reflect on the diploma use case that we've demonstrated today through the 6 demos of EBSI. So Katrien obviously is involved with Europa, which was involved in demo 1. You understand the importance of virtual mobility of students and educational staff better than anyone on this panel. What, in your opinion, is the role that university associations have in helping to scale EBSI and its adoption? Can you say a bit more about this?
Sure, yeah. Well, by piloting this technology, the higher education institutions in Europa contribute to the development, but also to the dissemination on this technology and this way of collaborating in education in a way that is scalable, that is replicable, and the impact on our students, but also on our graduates, on potential employers, as you've seen earlier today, but also on our professional staff in charge of admissions, credential evaluation, administration in general in education institution is it's clear, it's enormous, and we really see EBSI here as an enabler, facilitating better collaboration in education.
Thanks so much for that, Katrien. And I actually, like you mentioned rightly, I mean, it's not just about education, it's also about everything that articulates around this and other life events of people. And we have Koen here, actually, Koen from DG Emploi of the Commission. And DG Emploi has been working with EBSI on specifically a use case that addresses worker mobility. So another aspect of citizens' lives across borders in the European Union. Could you tell me a little bit more, Koen, about this European Social Security Pass use case within Emploi and what it means for worker mobility and beyond this?
Yeah, thank you very much, Maxine. I must specify one issue. I'm working in the skills agenda unit of DG Employment, but I will also share indeed a little bit of information around citizens, of course, who can request documents in the context of 2 EU regulations around concerning the free movement of workers and social security coordination. And this demonstrates also the application indeed of credentials outside the domain of learning, where also credentials is a sort of natural term, we have to say. So in the social security area, there are a total of 9 documents that are portable across Europe. And currently the S-Pass project is exploring a technical solution to digitalize those portable documents, and they are currently using one particular document for posted workers. And the reason why this is going on, and if it would be applied, it would have major benefits, because this would make the life of citizens so much easier, because they would have a seamless digital experience, they would have a low administrative burden, so it would be much easier for them. Secondly, also there would be real fights against fraud, but not only fraud, also error. I think we have to mention that. It's not just fighting fraud, of course, that's a major purpose, but also it reduces errors. And finally, for institutions, for administrations, it means an improvement of efficiency. And it also means lower costs, and that in the end is in the interest of everyone, not last in the interest of the taxpayer.
Thanks so much for that, Koen. I think you make some really important points there also about verification, about authenticity. So I wanted to actually get, because we've talked a lot about the education sector and also from the public sector's perspective, but I would like to hear a little bit more about the industry perspective. So we have Sebastiano here. You are representing the Digital SMEs Alliance. You obviously don't speak for all of them, but I think you have a good understanding of the relationship between SMEs and ICT and regulators like the European Commission. Could you tell us a little bit more about the difficulties or challenges that SMEs face in this space in Europe? We don't hear you.
Yes,
We hear you.
I unmuted myself. Indeed, I obviously cannot speak for all the SMEs, but as an association, we try to take up this role to speak up a little bit and on behalf of our members at least. Well, indeed, we see a lot of potential in exercises like EBSI because it is ideally something participative, which would allow a potentially large number of companies to interact and benefit from these services. As I guess I mean, all SMEs have a lot of troubles in complying with legislation, and in particular understanding EU legislation is particularly challenging. Therefore, any attempt that we can do to make that simple, to give back the control to citizens and businesses, as I think Marc was also advocating for, is definitely welcome. Now, if I have to be a little bit provocative, because we are in a panel discussion, what we hear is that EBSI is starting with an excellent intentions and a lot of good momentum, and we see the participation today certainly confirms that. What we'd like to see is probably a more participative role for the industry, especially for the SMEs. We'd like to see, really innovation happening via the innovator actors. Government cannot do innovation. Companies must do innovation. Startups, SMEs, and larger companies can do and should do innovation. And perhaps, what we'd like to see is EBSI becoming a platform on top of which companies can provide services, can innovate, can propose different things. At the moment, this is happening, but not really at the pace we would like, because companies have to be essentially vouched by their national member country, and different countries have different policies, and so we'd really like to see the access for the SMEs taking place, because we do have a lot of demand from our members to be able to use EBSI and similar structures to provide services. If needed, associations like Digital SME Alliance, or even like INATBA, I suppose we can play a role in even vouching for our members to say, okay, this is a member of ours, this is a trusted company, it could work on EBSI. So just, let us do it. Open the door, and I'm sure the private sector will come in and will bring and produce a lot of innovation.
Thanks so much. Certainly a timely comment, given that we are in a moment of reflection ahead of going into production on EBSI, and also thinking about how we can further engage the ecosystem in what the next phase of our project will be. So we certainly welcome these remarks. Now, I think, there's a lot of things that the government can do in terms of improving its capacity to innovate. There's innovation procurement, there's collaboration, but I think there's also something to be said, and referring back to a conversation we had previously, Marc, about policies, the policy design itself. So you speak, Marc, from a perspective of someone who represents the blockchain industry. It's a very innovative sector. What are your thoughts on the topic of how policymaking could better keep pace with innovation?
Yeah, thank you, Maxine. And I'm in danger of only doing 30 seconds on this, which will surprise you and anyone who knows me as well. But my overriding request that I hear from INATBA's members is, from a policy perspective and from a regulatory perspective, keep everything broad at the start. Don't try and narrow down too soon, because you could regulate or constrict innovation at a really early stage. And back to what Sebastiano was saying, if EBSI can find a way, and I'm sure it will, to harness this innovation, and I'm talking particularly from a blockchain perspective, to keep access to all blockchain technologies. And by that I mean not just the closed systems, but the open systems, not just the permission systems, but the permissionless as well, and have an opportunity to embrace all of that innovation. That would be something that we would hope to see from INATBA's perspective reflected in policy decisions and eventually in regulations. And the reason why that's important, I want to draw a parallel with Silicon Valley, which were probably some of the best examples of the biggest technology breakthroughs. Whether you think they're brilliant or not, I think that's open to personal interpretation. But the way success typically is generated in Silicon Valley, which I think is a good program to follow, is that when a project attracts attention, what you tend to find is, and it's very hard to do this gesture with only one arm working, so please excuse me, is that when a project gets interest and attracts the attention of the really smart developers, the really smart entrepreneurs, what happens is they tend to come and they bubble up and support this particular idea, this particular project, this particular company. And the more interest it gathers, the more innovative it is, the more smart people come, then the more it attracts talent and the better that particular idea or concept is supported. And the moment something better comes along or that project starts to stall is when you start to see some of that talent dissipate and go and join other projects. Now, that particular model is one that's very interesting, and perhaps we could use it as an approach towards EBSI, is allowing the private sector, in conjunction with citizens, test out what the applications are, what the approaches might be that could allow this talent to come, congregate, support the project, and bring with it citizens who are informing the design of that project, talking about the value they want to get from it. And in our view as in ATPA, that model can be best supported when the policy guidelines and the regulatory approaches are kept as broad as they can be at the start, so as not to constrict that innovation, not to narrow it down to too fewer companies. As Sebastiano rightly said, open it up to the whole ecosystem and get citizens involved in as well, right? Because we're building for Europe's citizens here. We want frictionless, easy access for all to all these wonderful services. So let's make sure we ask them what they're looking for and what they would like to see us build also.
No, thanks, Marc. More than 30 seconds, though, but very insightful. And actually touched upon a couple of ideas that I wanted to follow up on. And the first one, I'll ask Sebastiano to weigh in, because you mentioned Silicon Valley as a model, but you mentioned a lot of things. And I think the focus on co-creation and, citizen-centric development is extremely important. But you mentioned Silicon Valley as an example. And I wonder, Sebastiano, you are familiar with the digital SME ICT landscape in Europe. How does innovation in Europe differ from innovation, for instance, in Silicon Valley? And then I'll follow up on something else that you said. Sorry, you've been muted. Yeah, you.
Yes, again. Well, we do have a quite different ecosystem from the Silicon Valley, and I guess this is a broad topic. We have perhaps less investment, some difficulties with skills. There are several differences, but we do have our own model, right? And we do have a lot of companies. I would say what generally we say is that the Silicon Valley has been very strong in the B2C, business to consumer, and we have a chance in the B2B, in the business to business services. And this is why what we are advocating for in the case of EBSI is to open it up, to let our companies use it to provide services to businesses or to citizens in an open environment. Because you mentioned Silicon Valley, let me give you an example how that could be done. Even Facebook. I don't praise Facebook usually because we tend to favor European companies, but they had a very good approach with apps, games, etc. developed on top of Facebook. They let everyone doing it in an open way. They said, look, everyone can do it. The only condition is that if your app, if your game uses too many resources, we're going to be able to sue you, and you're going to pay the damages. But that's the reason why no big company actually use Facebook to develop, but many small businesses took the risk and they developed apps and games on top of Facebook. And this is again, I don't advocate for the Facebook model, but this is something, if Facebook could do it, why EBSI cannot do the same? Let independent innovators to play on top of it and come up with their own services, their own innovations.
I certainly hope that we collectively can come up with slightly better metaverse implementations than Mr. Zuckerberg. So thanks for your comments, Sebastiano. No, so obviously innovation is extremely important. And I think part of creating the conditions for innovation is paying attention to the ecosystem. I believe that when left rampant and unconstrained, these things sometimes don't go very well. I want to bring in the perspective of our European Commission innovation representative here today. Andrea, we talked about ecosystems, we've talked about innovation. And I would like to make the link between what was just said regarding the importance of collaboration with the private sector, but also with the core of what we're trying to do today, which is really create reliable verification. So could you talk about your experience in the Knowledge Management and Innovation Unit, and especially on the European Digital COVID Certificate?
Thanks, Emilia, Maxine, and I'm really pleased to contribute on these topics. I think that the key word of the ecosystem, how we can build an ecosystem, is indeed, I would say, the very mantra for what is to drive us for the future. As you said, we are talking about verifiable credential, the importance of having attestation, entitlements, proofs, which are verified and verifiable, therefore. And indeed, we have seen over the last couple of years a very example of what is the potential that the verifiable credential, in the sense of being associated to an attestation of some rights or some properties that the person is to prove, how this verifiable credential could actually ease the world of users. The UDCC, so the European Digital COVID Certificate, is actually an experience that I have gained over the last 15 months. I'm in charge still of the technical system, which is supporting the cross-border recognition of digital COVID certificates, which were introduced with a collective effort by member states, researchers, private sectors, in the I would say, with the hope to bring, I would say, or to ensure freedom to citizens of Europe that could indeed, I would say, travel around, despite the fact that for this to be the case, they had to provide a certain proof in relation to vaccination, to recovery from I would say, disease, which are regulated at the national level. And because of the risk of the pandemic and the care that was put by member states to work together, the development of the UDCC was done in a very short time, in a very open, transparent environment. All the code, the specification are open source. The contribution from member states, from experts in member states, experts from private sector engaged by member states to contribute to development, made it possible for things to be developed in just like 4 months. We went from March to July, from the idea to and the commitment taken by the member states to the realization. And if you look at the UDCC, it's nothing but a verifiable credentials. Is a document which can indeed be verified offline across Europe. And the power of having these credentials to be verified is what is indeed makes it easy for whoever is entitled to hold and is the owner of that credential to prove whatever he has to prove without possibly disclosing too much information that might be related to the proof that he is producing. But of course, I mean, for this to happen, you don't need just, I would say, a format or a gateway. You need to have everything that is related. So the verifiers, the providers of the digital services, which are associated to the use of the proofs, the way in which, I would say, had been done in Europe, with the 27 member states being responsible under the sovereign responsibility for health system to do what they felt to be most important for the city. But nonetheless, they did it in a very coordinated way, with the support, of course, of the Commission, which we made quite an effort. But as I said, without an ecosystem perspective, things would have not been able and would have not been so effective. So the next challenge is go beyond that. And I think that what had been put forward in June 2021 by the Commission as the proposal for the European Digital Identity Wallet is indeed going in that direction to enable citizens and businesses, and so I'm very much with Sebastiano, to ease their life because they will be allowed to control what data they may or may not be able to share in a way that is authoritative, with legal effect, and of course trustworthy, so tamper-proof. And I think that for this to happen, the attestation should be verifiable, should be verified, and should be verifiable across Europe. So for this to happen, we need, I would say, the will, those who have ideas and those who have, I would say, the creative engine that is pushing them through their life to be allowed, to be facilitated, to be supported in contributing to develop the ecosystem. But of course, I mean, member states, the European legislation will have to put this boundary condition in place to make sure that everything then will be for the sake of the convenience, security, and protection of our rights in order to make our life much easier and convenient.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm hearing a theme come back up, which is the theme of trust. Trust as in a function of the ecosystem that could be underpinned by legislation or regulation, but also has to be, lived within the ecosystem and all its actors. So on the trust question, and I will return to the ecosystem and decentralized trust in a bit, because EU DCC was very much a centralized approach, but EBSI is a much more decentralized approach. So there's some interesting discussion to be had there. But I want to go on trust here, because the notion of trust is not just about identity, very much like we've seen in all the use cases, all the demos today. Trust applies to a lot of domains in our lives. So can we, thinking about verifiable credentials and the trust that they're supposed to give us, can you give us some examples, Koen, from your experience? You have experience with micro-credentials and lifelong learning. I would love to hear more.
Yeah, thank you, Maxine. So in the team in DG Employment in which I'm working, which I'm leading on transparency of skills and qualifications, we manage the European Digital Credentials for Learning, or which is sometimes referred to as the Europass digital credentials, but we use now the European Digital Credentials for Learning in order to reflect the broader scope, of what digital credentials can be. And this is a service. And we are working also towards making the use of the blockchain possible. This is a service of verifiable credentials that, of course, can be used in the context of, let's say, formal education and training, but also can be used beyond that in the domain of the non-formal learning. Because, and we saw this a little bit in the demonstration on micro-credentials. I mean, learning for most people, of course, does not stop at the end of, your initial or your formal qualification, your master degree for many people, or a vocational qualification. And we all need to up and to reskill. And most of the up and reskilling that people do is not taking place in the formal context, but in the non-formal context. And also there, digital credentials can have a role to play. There are many providers also of training and of credentials in the non-formal and informal world. And in this, I would say, of course, the issue of trust, there is the envelope. Yes, that's crucial. But we also need to look into the content of the envelope, because what we need to know when we talk about learning is what somebody has learned. What are the learning outcomes, and because this determines what you can do finally on the labor market and also for further studies. So yeah, you need, regarding trust, of course, we have institutional things like we are building an accreditation base, for example, under the European Digital Credentials for Learning, but the trust cannot just be focusing only on the formal parts of education and training. It should be extended to all those actors active in lifelong learning, and this includes also very much the micro-credentials.
And thanks a lot for that, Koen. I'm hearing that there's a massive opportunity here, which is regarding assertions that people can make in the decentralized web. And this takes us to the third topic that I wanted to address as part of our panel, which really is the heart of our discussion today, and we've been dancing around it, but it's the question of Web3, whether we like the name or not, and the implication that it has for digital trust. So Marc, I would like to know, how can EBSI actually make sure that people can benefit, don't miss out on the opportunities of Web3?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, and I agree with you. I'm not sure Web3 is a good descriptor. I think, an enhanced digital experience is probably more akin to, what we're all looking at here. I'll break this answer down into two parts. The first part is how Europe could position itself to take full advantage of these enhanced digital experiences. And then the second, we'll look at, I think, opportunities for EBSI, the Commission, policymakers and regulators to try and ensure that the ecosystem is well positioned to take advantage of the opportunity. So I think the first part of what I would like to give as an answer to you is around education. We were just talking about how the importance of non-formal education where you don't go through an academic institution or traditional academic institution. It might be experiences that you gain through a work placement. It might be some of that research you do yourself. It might be attending this presentation today, learning about all the great innovation. This is all, I think, a good form of education that we see within INATBA and a lot of our members, many citizens now taking on themselves to educate themselves about what is happening in this enhanced digital age, what's really occurring. And, we spend a lot of time talking about cryptocurrencies. I know that's not the flavor of today's discussion, but it's where a lot of innovation happens. And we see a huge number of private citizens trying to educate themselves, attending informal learnings, which help them equip themselves with an understanding of what the base layer technologies are, how to be safe if they want to look at the world of cryptocurrencies, how to gain access to primary data so that they can run their own analysis and not have to look at what might be interpreted headlines coming from news sources that are perhaps a little bit lazy and a little bit too focused on clickbait, for their headlines so that they can sell their advertising. And those types of skills, those soft skills, those self-taught skills, those skills that citizens seek out themselves, I think should be really encouraged. And I'm encouraged to hear the discussion turning towards how we can build systems that allow an attestation of this self-learning to be recognized in an acceptable format across borders, where there is proof that individuals are equipping themselves with skills, are perhaps even retraining themselves outside of traditional academic establishments. And I think, again, organizations, private sector organizations, have a role to play in this, because where private sector organizations see individuals contributing, perhaps sometimes free of charge, going out, helping at events, moderating panels, and demonstrating their knowledge, there could be a room for these private sector organizations to feed back into these digital credentials the fact that, yes, they acknowledge this individual has invested some of their time, has demonstrated capacity to learn, has demonstrated an interest in the topic, and is trying to upskill themselves, is trying to change their skill sets. And I think that's a very interesting perspective. Just to turn very briefly to the public sector side of things. And I want to touch on regulation here. I think there is a large part for joined up regulation to play. And I want to draw a parallel between wallets for digital credentials and wallets for financial applications. In a piece of legislation or regulation, currently traveling through Parliament, called the Transfer of Funds Regulation, there are some quite onerous requirements that look like they might be placed on self-hosted wallets. So these are wallets that individuals make a choice to use themselves, which are offline, and into which they insert their digital assets. Now, sometimes, yes, it might be cryptocurrencies, but other times it might be a piece of digital artwork by their favorite artist, or it might be something else which they don't even intend to get value from, but they want to guard in their private wallet. And the reason why they want a private unhosted wallet is because they want to take control of their own assets. They want to control their own privacy. they're not comfortable, Maxine, to use your earlier example of perhaps a platform like Facebook operating as their digital wallet and having free access to much of their data. Now, if we end up in a situation where the transfer of funds regulation does place such onerous terms on self-hosted or non-custodial wallets, what we might see is an outpouring of some of that innovation into different geographies, because the business of trying to deliver these unhosted wallets will become so cumbersome and so costly that the European market will no longer be attractive. Now, what's the primary function of that particular piece of regulation is to safeguard consumers, which at INATBA we always support, to protect market integrity, which we always support, and to a certain extent to ensure balance sheet protection for financial services, which undoubtedly we support. There could be an unintended consequence on other really innovative areas like EBSI and the innovation around individual self-hosted non-custodial wallets. So some joined up thinking, I think, is what we as INATBA are calling for from a policy perspective, to really seize the opportunity of this enhanced digital experience, which we're currently terming as Web3.
Actually, your answer is allowing me to jump a little bit forward in the discussion, and I want to pick up on this question of self-sovereign, because so far we've actually not talked about blockchain very much at all. And I think this is a perfect time to bring it in, because you know, we've talked about trust, we've talked to some degree, and not in very much depth, but about like interoperability standards. But we also need to talk about protecting user data, compliance, and security. So from the perspective of a regulator, you know, we can invent regulations, we have GDPR, we can invent more. But I think also there's an interesting technological angle to be taken here on what blockchain might invite us to re-examine the way we think about data ownership and about data privacy. I'll let you maybe, Marc, follow up on your train of thought, and then I want to talk to the other panelists about these topics.
Yeah, thanks, Maxine. I'll try and be a little briefer. Let me start with an experience from my side of renting a car in Europe. So what happens when you rent a car in Europe, as many of you will know, you turn up at the car rental desk, they ask for your papers. Oftentimes what they do is they photocopy these papers to prove you have a driving license. And then I watch them trot to the back of their office, drop this paper in a filing cabinet. And I always look at that filing cabinet and think to myself, at 2 o'clock in the morning, when this airport is not policed, will that be locked? And how long do you keep it for? So this concept of blockchain allows us, at least in part, to remove that particular challenge. And it allows us to prove that we are who we say we are, and we know that from verifiable credentials, but in a way where we choose what data we want to share with which parties. And it's that control element which allow us to meet the criteria of attesting who we are and what our status is, but only with certain parties, and perhaps without transferring the data itself as well, using concepts such as zero knowledge proof, which is quite a technical term, but in basic terms, what it means is you can prove beyond doubt that a certain set of data exists and are in the right format without needing to share those data. And that really is what appeals to me. And that would remove that experience that I've had and all those fears I've had maybe hundreds of times in my life around Europe, where I'm genuinely concerned that multiple copies of my driving license are sitting in people's, I'm sure very well guarded, but file desks around the world or around Europe.
I know what you mean. I always guard my desk. So I mean, you know, there's something about the previous big invasion of the European Union on data protection was GDPR. So historically, I know that the SMEs might have had difficulties in implementing that regulation. I would like to hear a little bit more from Sebastiano on that experience and what we might learn from it as we move in a future where we have to think about data protection, data ownership. With blockchain technologies, but other technologies too.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, GDPR is a fantastic example that can be used to describe good things or bad things, depending on what you want to demonstrate. But because really, this is legislation that everyone in Europe knows about it. At least they have heard about it, and certainly most SMEs have come to discussions with, consultancy, privacy lawyers, etc., who propose services. It's honestly, for most of our companies, it has been a nightmare to comply with GDPR. And what really bothers me is the fact that the legislator, when they wanted to do GDPR, the idea was to solve the problem of data protection. Why? Because, we all know there are these big platforms which take data and they do God knows what with, they make money, etc. And, trying to solve a problem which was clear and evident and had names and surnames, okay, they went up to an horizontal legislation which applies to everyone and, creates this risk assessment approach whereby, as long as you are a company and as long as you are doing something with data, you also bear risk. You have to manage it. You have to demonstrate how much you are creating a risk for data protection and so on. And that could be logic from a certain point of view, because indeed, that allows everyone to understand their level. But it does create an enormous burden on companies whose business has nothing to do with compliance, with data, and so on and so forth. And so basically the large majority of the companies out there shouldn't be bothered at all to deal with GDPR, except those who want to make money with data, right? But as much as this is simple to explain, limited to those who want to make money with data, this was not spelled out in the legislation. Now, I'm glad that I want to believe that our legislators have understood the mistake, let me say, and they have slightly changed the approach. And I'm glad that recently they have approved very important pieces of legislation called the DMA and the DSA, Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act, which are targeted legislations, where it's really spelled out that you have to be a company within certain thresholds, essentially a big multinational doing big money all over the world, in order to be targeted by that legislation. This is the right approach because you recognize who has created the problem and you go there and you solve the problem there. Not this horizontal legislation that is only a burden for everyone. Having said that, of course, we have been telling SMEs you need to comply with GDPR because this is good for you, because the more you learn about data protection, the more you can make money with it, the more you can have a knowledge that you can sell and you can improve and you can be more competitive. Okay, so the message towards the SMEs has not been the same towards the message vis-a-vis the message we sent to the policymakers. But as we are talking mainly to the policymakers today, I want to be clear, that is not the right approach. Go for targeted legislation.
Thanks a lot, Sebastiano. I will put in a word of love for GDPR. It has allowed me to send many a very angrily worded letter to my former cell phone provider, and for that, I am happy. I want to actually bring in, we've listened a lot to the industry perspective, and it is valuable, but I also want to hear from Andrea on, from a regulator's perspective, we're entering into this landscape where data might become self-sovereign, and at the same time, we're trying to preserve citizens from the illegitimate exploitation of their data for commercial purposes. We've talked about a lot of things during today's demos, but also during the panel. And one of the things that has come up is the notion of unique personal identifiers, and now the governance of personal data. So, Andrea, what are your feelings on this? What are your thoughts?
Before I answer your question, I think I need to spare something in relation to what has been said earlier in connection to GDPR and protection of privacy. When I was a bit younger, so in the second part of the 90s, actually it was in Europe where the concept of privacy enhancing technology were introduced, actually in standardization activities. Why? Because indeed the push for the principle of respecting and preserving the security and control of personal data, which might be needed in order to I would say, fulfill or to complete a transaction, pushed to develop a new technological solution, including the zero proof. type of technologies. Why I'm saying this? I'm saying this because, I mean, it is important that indeed, I would say, we take, I would say, the legislations which is trying to define, to protect the principle, to establish principles, to protect rights, in the way in which, you know, technology can now, digital technology can do things that perhaps with paper you couldn't do it. You know, if I have to rent a car, as it was said previously by Marc, you know, I don't need to give a copy of my license, driving license, but the company that is renting the car should indeed be able to discharge the responsibility of verifying that I'm entitled to drive a car, so have a license. But what they have to have is a proof that it is enforceable. They don't even need to have any numbers or any data on what is in it is my driving license. So that is where I think that is important to focus. And focusing on this means focusing, and now I come to the unique identifier, to what is indeed that we want to accomplish with what may or may not be regarded as a unique identifier. In the others regulation, we do have a persistent identifier which is associated to the authentication, cross-border authentication, which would allow a citizen in a country today to use their identity means, which are recognized at the national level with legal effect at the national level, to use those credentials to indeed access services, public services in another countries without having to go through as I think I heard earlier, an incumbent process of onboarding and, you know, this providing a number of data just to prove who you are. You have already proved it, you know, elsewhere. If the trust model is there, which makes possible for what is being proven in country A to be recognized as such in country B, which is indeed the difficulties that we have in Europe, then of course, I mean, you are done. And this is what is happening now. What we are happening now, and what digital technology allow us to do is indeed to focus on the proofs. What is the very need for somebody to manage personal data in relation, for instance, to opening a bank account, to discharge the responsibility in relation to verifying the identity of the prospective client. If this has already happened elsewhere in relation to identity, not a risk profile, that is something else, then, and there is the possibility to do a kind of roaming of this identity proof from country A to country B, as it is now the case with the others regulation, and will be even made more convenient once the new proposal, the amending proposal for the others regulation will possibly be approved, then I would not have to go through the same onboarding. I can just ask my bank in country A to port or to transmit a proof that the KYC was completed, and having this proof to be associated to me that I have an identity which is recognized equally in country A and country B. So why I'm saying all this? I'm saying all this because, I mean, there is a lot of hype on unique identifiers, which is always introduced in order to make things convenient for the public administration. This is where the public, you know, the unique identifier comes from. I'm Italian, so I have a unique identifier, whether I like it or not. But, you know, we need to focus on actually on the user, on the citizen. What is indeed that makes the life of the citizen more convenient? Is something like a unique identifier? Maybe. Is this something that is not going to be hijacked and become a kind of surveillance, I would say, means, as it is in some countries far away from Europe? Then, of course, I mean, these are all reflections that need to take place. But what I think it would be most important and highest priority is to focus on how we make the digital experience to be frictionless, to be convenient, secure, and transparent. I need to know what is happening to my data. And even better, I need to have access to the service by proving that what is requested is something that I'm entitled to, without disclosing, you know, it's like the age. I'm more than 18, they don't need to have my date of birthday. They need to have a proof that is enforceable, that I'm more than 18 or less than 60 or more than 35. They don't need to know who am I, whether I'm a male or a woman, or whether I was born in country A or country B. So all this is innovation that, okay, the digital allows, but we need to foster and to stimulate. This is why the legislation should be as much as possible technological neutral, and it should look ahead, but at the same time should be, I would say, very much supportive of new thinking in order to make compliance easier. Because I mean, what Sebastiano said in terms of, compliance killing, in a way, SMEs is absolutely correct, and we have, we have to make this to turn into a different, I would say, direction to make the work of SMEs much easier than it is today.
Thanks so much, Andrea. I think you've touched upon a lot of things that we could spend hours discussing together. But I will try to summarize the most important things that emerge. I think, first of all, in data ownership, blockchain is a technology that does change the paradigm a little bit if used correctly. But when it comes to making claims in a world where there is so much data, one aspect is having to ensure that people can comfortably share information about themselves to fulfill whatever they're trying to do without at the same time compromising themselves. And on the other hand, also that information, whatever it might be, needs to be mutually understandable across borders, and standards come in there. So lots to think about, but as we are reaching the end of our panel, I do want to have, let's zoom out a little bit. So Katrien, you are a historian. I think you can take a broad view on these things. And towards the end of Andrea's discussion, he was mentioning the importance of user centricity. So you are a historian, you are heavily involved in the educational sector and the humanities. What is your take on everything that we've just discussed here regarding Web 3.0, whatever we want to call it, decentralized trust and data ownership?
We could talk about that for a very long time, actually, but I very much echo what was said by Andrea, first of all, and then in general throughout history, you really see how people strive for privacy in many ways. In the layout of their homes, for instance, in which only part was used to host people, but at the same time, historians know so much information, often very rather personal information about so many people, because those people weren't in a position to safeguard that information. That is, it's often that kind of information that makes them so relatable, so human. And then at the same time, the internet makes it so much more difficult to keep things private. And I think that the demos we were shown today show how developments such as blockchain can contribute to us addressing this need for privacy. This user-centric approach regarding virtual credentials, the fact that an issuer and a verifier do not need to interact with each other directly, which contributes to privacy, and then certainly the fact that the owner of the credential decides what is shared with whom. This selective data disclosure and control is extremely important for our students. So the development of this selective disclosure is promising.
Thanks so much, Katrien. So as it's, we've almost made time, I was going to ask everyone here on this panel to give us a final thought on the discussion we've had. Try to keep it short, even though it will be difficult. So I'll start with Katrien, because you just spoke, and then we'll go through the list.
One final thought is maybe ensuring that no one is left behind. So it is so important to keep this digital inclusion in mind. It's not likely that authorities in the different member states will be ready to issue those digital identity credentials all at the same time, and so we need to make sure that that this doesn't have impact on their learners' access to education. And there are tools like, for instance, the student identifier can help us to bridge this period in between the world we are in now and the world we will be in tomorrow.
Thanks so much, Katrien. Andrea.
Difficult. to say something, but I think that, you know, in a way, I will say what I was told when I started working on crypto 30 years ago. And a colleague from the UK said, you know, I mean, as long as this becomes transparent and convenient, it will never, I would say, really be usable. I suspect that indeed we need to focus, as they do, you know, the platform providers, to make things very convenient and very easy to use. If there is frictions in the way in which we may indeed bring security and protection to the user, then of course, I mean, we are failing, because I mean, you know, that is not going to be happening. It's not a problem of education, it's a problem really of, I would say, making, I would say, frictionless to be the paradigm. And we need to make this to happen. So the shift of paradigm towards indeed convenience with protection, with security and accountability is to me the way forward.
Thanks so much. And Koen?
Yeah, thank you, Maxine. I mean, one point I would like to bring in here is that, I mean, if we talk about verifiable credentials in international, in a cross-border dimension with decentralization, where we have transparency, citizen protection, and so on, for these credentials to travel between countries and to be, you know, understood across countries, we also need to have a common vocabulary. And in particular, in the field of learning, where so many institutions issue credentials, it's very important that there is a common data schemata that are used in order to achieve this mutual understanding. Thanks.
A compulsory EBSI plug that we did rely on the European learning model.
Exactly.
Some of the demos
this
today.
is an example that I didn't mention, but that I was referring to.
Thanks so much, Koen. Sebastiano.
Let me just repeat and perhaps stress that we see, you know, a lot of promise in EBSI. When it was launched, we really saw a lot of enthusiasm about it, and we still see it because it is government understanding the potential of a technology, and which you know, certainly industry or parts of industry, not all of us, have understood for a while. And it is, you know, a great challenge to build it in a way which is a public-private partnership, so that there is a real ecosystem made where the public sector takes the leadership together with the private sector, and together we go into a journey of innovation, making the right choices with interoperability, with openness, with access, with decentralization, which is all possible through blockchain. But we have to do it together, and we have to believe that we have to be bold, no? Because other regions in the world are bold. They are winning the digital revolution. We know this, and Europe has a great chance to do something with this technology. And EBSI is in the right place. It is the right thing to do at the right time, but let's do it.
We're enthusiastic. What a call to arms. And finally, Marc, your closing thoughts on the discussion we just had.
Firstly, I want to say thank you to everyone that's been involved in getting EBSI to this point, because it's super easy to sit here on a panel and give thoughts, but it's a lot harder to build something, to have the vision, to have the conviction, to keep pushing, and to bring the community together. So I know from INATPA's perspectives, from my own personal observations of working with Pierre, yourselves, and the team, thank you. It's not been easy for you, I can well imagine. I would encourage boldness. Let's not be afraid. You know, we're going to make mistakes. How many mistakes do we make every day, right? I mean, sometimes when I go and make a cup of coffee, by the time I've had my first sip, I've already made 30 mistakes, but it doesn't stop me walking out of the door. So I would say, let the innovators innovate, give them some room, open up as much, as widely as possible to all the innovators to come in using all the technologies, not just blockchain, all the technologies that are available, and build for the citizens. Don't build for the ease of the governments. Citizens are demanding greater respect and control over their privacy. That is going to be what Web3 or the new digital experience demands of individuals an ability to prove who they are, but in a way that allows them to preserve their privacy and not get dragged into the platform age that we've lived through, where unbeknownst to us, we sacrifice everything that's known about us for some ability to watch cats dancing for 30 seconds. So build for the citizens. The citizens are demanding privacy. Privacy of data is going to be fundamental to Web3, and be brave, keep being brave, keep building, break things, don't worry about getting it wrong. The industry will support you, and yeah, keep going. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for this. Obviously, on behalf of the entire EBSI team, thanks for your words, and we'll keep working hard. It's not just the European Commission, it's also all of the member countries of the EBP. So thanks very much. Now, we are running a little behind schedule. If we can still have 10 minutes of your time, I will open the floor for audience questions. If you have other things to do, then we will drop the audience questions. But if you do have 10 minutes, then I would love if we could open the floor to our audience to ask you guys for some more insights. I'm hearing no sounds of protest, so let's just go to Slido. So same drill as before. Luisa, if you could bring up your screen share. Slido, use this code on the website or scan the QR code, and then you will need to go to the Q&A tab at the top of your screen, whether it's on mobile or on desktop. Submit your questions, and if it's addressed to a specific panelist, then please make sure to write so in the question. We can go and look at the question screen and see if we have anything coming in. We'll take about 10 minutes worth of questions, I would say approximately 5. I think you are in poll mode. I think we need to go in Q&A mode. Yes, we're having some issues with our admin panel here. There we go. There we go. Okay. So which opportunities do you see for using EBSI for cross-border social security, and so specifically the ESPAS? That will be for Koen, I think.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, it's really the 3 things that I mentioned. It's just to avoid the fraud and error. This is quite important. This protects also, of course, citizens. And then, yeah, to have a life that is easier for citizens. No papers, but digital documents will make it easier. For example, yeah, also in the context of the health insurance card. So those are the opportunities that we see there indeed.
Thanks a lot. I have Jeroen, I saw your question in the WebEx chat, and I will answer it now. So when we discussed open innovation and participation of industry, and Marc made his case, and it was very convincing, this is something that we in EBSI are also at the moment preparing. But it is very much in the works. We are thinking about innovation events. We're thinking about hackathons. But as you know, events take a lot of time. And I've just suffered through this one. So after the summer is most likely when you will start seeing these things being advertised. We will keep the community informed through our channels. That's the mystery. There is no real mystery. There's just at this point a lack of content. So let's see. These are more questions related to the demos. I think I will skip that. Let's see if there's anything for the panelist. EBSI identify plants. I'm not sure I have thoughts on this. I'm not sure the rest of us have thoughts on this. I think we should focus on already scaling the implementations that we currently have, and then we'll think about more out-of-the-box implementations. Vendor lock-in, we are using open source. Or like we see application integration with LinkedIn. Let me see. Plan pilot projects with other target groups. That might be interesting, actually, not to speak about EBSI's plan specifically, but to talk about, oh, we lost a question. Okay, no, I like this one. Engaging ecosystems is not so easy. So what activities can accelerate the adoption of EBSI? I will point this question actually to Marc and to Andrea. So Marc, you can start. That's one perspective.
Yeah, thanks for the question. No, it's not easy. And I think ecosystem creation, curation, and maintenance has become almost the new lifeblood of many projects and businesses in the technology space. It's right, it's not easy. What can accelerate the creation of an ecosystem? I think it's giving a certain amount of latitude and freedom to those individuals, to those businesses, and to those organizations joining the ecosystem, so that they have a feeling that they can contribute and make a material change. Either can contribute projects, products, ideas, or make a material change to lines of code, functionality. And the ecosystem, once it feels ownership for a project, in our experience at the very least, then starts to come together in quite a strong way. And we shouldn't mistake a successful ecosystem with a large ecosystem. To our experience, an ecosystem can be equally powerful if it's relatively small scale, but has huge involvement from the participants and has a variety of skills within it. So certainly one of the ideas I saw in the chat, and I think you mentioned as well, Maxine, was this concept of a hackathon or co-creation. I think that's always a very good start point. And I do take your point not lightheartedly, that it's a lot of work for those pulling events together and building these ecosystem engagement opportunities. So I think it's unrealistic to think that there could be one every month. But I do believe it's worth the investment, and that is what could pay off in terms of building an engaged and valuable ecosystem.
Sebastiano, you wanted to weigh in on this?
Yes, I mean, I totally agree with what Marc said. I think this is probably one of the key questions we should try to respond to today. And I think Marc is giving a lot of good thoughts about it. I can only say, adding on top of what he said, of course, we should see companies, especially ecosystems in terms of industry, as of course users and implementers, no? Also those who can innovate on top of it. The only thing I can say is we can also try to use the existing networks that are there, where companies have already expressed a lot of interest in working with EBSI. And I'm talking in particular about large associations such as INATBA or the European Digital SME Alliance, and maybe others, which are already active at European level, which can offer. I mean, I would be very happy if we were asked to, organize a hackathon or an event or whatever, to bring in the companies, or even to vouch for the companies who could work with EBSI. As I said earlier, until now, companies have to be vouched by their country. And, if you are an SME, you cannot just call your ministry and say, look, I would like to do something with EBSI. It's not like that. I mean, it may be like that for a European Commission civil servant who can call the Italian or the Spanish or the German ministry and say, I want to do this and that. But for a normal SME, you cannot just call your ministry unless you are in a very small country. Perhaps you can do that in Andorra or Luxembourg, I don't know, but not in big countries. You cannot just call your ministry and say, I want to work on EBSI. So let's use the networks that we have, such as these associations, to vouch for the companies to work with EBSI. Just an idea.
We may take you up on your suggestion. Just careful what you wish for. Okay, so let's move on to some other questions that we see here. I don't want to talk about the European Digital Identity Initiative because none of us here actually stand in for that. Okay, most ideal future for EBSI. Look, let's talk about the idea of this privacy enhanced utopia, because I think there's something interesting there. I think people were really compelled by the notion of privacy. Andrea, could you say something on your vision for the future of privacy beyond blockchain?
The future of privacy is actually, again, to regain the control of our data. If to prove that I'm more than 18, I have to give my date of birth, the copy of my identity card. I mean, when I was working on the IDAS, the first association that contacted me was actually the association of e-gambling industry. Because I mean, they have a huge cost on proving the age and the residency of the user, and they may run into huge risk. So if they had the possibility to just rely on proofs that will say in a way that is unique and accountable and enforceable that the user that is trying to connect is actually meeting certain requirements or more than 18, residing in a country where the company is licensed, fine. Why do they need to get all the documents in relation to the age, the residency, the marital status, whether they are or not on the blacklist for gamers? I mean, all this can be simplified. So in this respect, privacy enhancing is actually going back to what is indeed the finality. The data minimization principle that had been introduced is about making really the focus of what is collected to be, I would say, directly related to the need for the transaction. As I said, if I if I have already a bank account in country A and I want to open a bank account in country B, why should I go toward I would say, through the same KYC process that I have already done elsewhere? I just need to have an attestation that this is done, full stop. But the attestation should be enforceable in relation to what has been done, the link to my identity in country A and country B, and the proof that indeed this process has been completed and vouched by whatever regulator is indeed, I would say, in power in the country. So privacy enhancing is actually minimizing data. Privacy enhancing means controlling the data, making the user to regain the control of their data. And if we do this, of course, I mean, it means that we do decouple the data of profiling, transaction, whatever, from the identity, because they are not needed. This is where the big money is done, by the platform, because they keep the data of the profile and the identity together. Let's dissociate them, because we can do it. Technology now can do it. In the analog world, you can't, but in the digital one, you can.
Thanks, Andrea. Katrien, any final comments on this, I think, and then we will close this panel.
I'm very much in line with what Andrea SERVIDA just said. I think you've summarized this brilliantly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure that we in EBSI are building a utopia, but we're certainly trying our best to improve the lives of citizens. So with that said, I think we can drop the Slido, and I'm going to bid our panel really a big thank you for your time today, for your enthusiasm, and for the interesting thoughts that you contributed. More questions than answers, I feel, and I wish we had more time to explore them, but we need to wrap up this day. So thanks very much. Feel free to stay for the remainder, but we will now go back to our regular order of the day. So thanks again.